is Eric Kroback. I am a CRM developer at Vaspian. I've been in the Zoho space for about a little over a decade. Started out moving from pen and paper. Yes, it was pen and paper. We were using pen and paper to manage the business. And we moved to Salesforce initially. And it was clunky at the time and very expensive. So after testing out some other ones, they landed on Zoho. And then just continued to learn from there, including some more formal education as a software engineer, and then worked for a couple of consultancies. And now I'm an internal Zoho developer. Been doing that for coming up on 3 years. And really excited about this talk here. I love what you're able with client scripts. It really, as my slide says here, they really improve the UX, and that's what that's going to kind of be the highlight from a. It's going to be be like two focuses. So I'm going to talk about how this really improves the user experience, which I'm gathering that you all already know that. And that's been my experience. One of the biggest at the time, if you want to call shortcomings in CRM, was the inability to really give some quick feedback to the user around what they were experiencing, what they need to do, things of that nature. We had widgets, we had field validations, which were helpful at an individual field level. But this really opened up the door to really drive a better user experience, which when any of us have gone to some sort of website to fill out a form, or we're given some sort of user experience as we're on the page, and it makes it really smooth and seamless for whatever it is we're doing. And that's what we got here. So what I'm going to go over is a use case that we had. I'm going to go over the solution that we came up with, the process that it solved, and we'll dive into what that process was. It's a sales process. So we'll dive into how that process was working, the features we use that specific in client script. We'll walk through the code, which is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time, because I'm sure that's what everybody's looking for, to see some code and talk through it. So we're going to spend the bulk of our time there. And then I'm going to finish up just recapping on the benefits that I gain using static resources. Because this is going to be heavily focused on static resources. Okay, so the problem, the sales were tracked in spreadsheets. They were also DocuSign documents, and those were scattered around in Drive folders, whether it was Microsoft OneDrive or Zoho WorkDrive, or potentially attached to the account in CRM. And then the sales themselves were not tracked in CRM at all. So it was everything was all over the place, and only one person really had a pulse, because they had the spreadsheet, and it wasn't working. As I'm sure we can all imagine, if we've worked on a spreadsheet and tried to share it around and whatnot, it just gets really complicated. The other problem is we don't have a high volume of sales, and so the sales team isn't going to get a lot of repetition in there, and they have no Zoho experience. So that means that it needs to be very straightforward, and they need to get prompted on what to do, because they're not doing it enough to really gain that muscle memory on what they're doing and where they're clicking and what to click for which type of product and things of that nature. So they needed a visual guide. So those were the problems and the hurdles related to putting something together for them. So the solution, as I alluded to, was moving the sales into deals. So no longer is it just tracked in a spreadsheet or somebody keeping a list in their personal notebook or potentially some emails, but it was in the deals module. We use client scripts to create an enhanced user experience. Like I mentioned, that will give them prompts of things they need to do next, highlighting different things, and whatnot. And then again, use the static resources to develop a good design as far as what's happening with the JavaScript. So the sales process doesn't differ greatly from any other one. Starts out with prospecting. The lead comes in, or a deal is created. The product is chosen. So we have a couple products that we sell. So once the product is chosen, then they're prompted to enter in relevant data. The lead is converted via a special convert button. Or if it's a deal, then we'll just enter in what might need to be entered. Then it moves into a quoting phase where the products are entered into a subform and any other relevant data is entered in. Regulatory fees are auto-confirmed. I failed to mention, I think because the slide was off, that we're in the telecommunications space. So we sell phone services, phone lines, actual phones, soft phones, and the like. And so there's some regulatory fees that have to be included in our quoting. And then the quotes are created and quotes are confirmed. And then it moves into the contract phase where the contract is created and sent. So the client script features that were used were static resources, widgets. I'm not actually using a flyout widget. Confirmation pop-ups, deactivating buttons, updating records, updating fields, field highlights, and subform editing. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and transition now to the process. Okay, so let's do refresh here. Okay. Let's go ahead and go back to the account because I want to start from scratch here so you can see the process. So I'm going to go ahead and create a deal. A couple things going to happen here. So first, I'm going to choose a contact. And then you'll notice the email and the phone number pulled in. So that was via a client script. So when the contact gets associated, it pulls in phone number and email into here. Next, we're going to choose type. So we're going to focus on the phone systems. Okay, and the next thing you notice is as soon as they chose the type, then the deal name was auto-populated. So if I switch to a different type, you'll notice that the type was changed. And we'll go back here, and you see it was changed again. And that's really great because you want to standardize your deal names as much as possible. Might not be a need in every industry, but for ours, it was helpful to have the deal name standardized. That way, we're not getting confused about which deal is which, especially if a customer has a couple different products that we're selling at a particular time. It's nice to have the deal names standardized. And that can be helpful also for a lot of different purposes, whether it's reporting, doing some data cleanup, automations, and the like. Having it standardized just really makes all of those processes very simple. Okay, great. Next, I'm going to fill in a couple other things that are needed here. We already have the contract term. I'm going to go ahead and save, and a few things are going to happen here. First, we get prompted to fill in some fields here, and that was again with the client script. So let's go ahead. We're going to add a service. So let's choose phone lines. We're going to do 5. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and save and pay close attention to the subform here. Address. Oh, okay. Didn't quite do what I was expecting it to do there. Let's go back. I'm going to explain all this here in a minute, but I want to go down here. I think it jumped ahead of me there. So let's add all this in here. That way. Okay. So what I was expecting to happen was for the regulatory feed to auto-populate here. So let's try this again. Okay, let's go ahead and jump to another deal that I had in my preparation for this. All right. Not entirely sure why that one's not populating correctly, but I'm just going to proceed. Okay, so here I was working with this one earlier, preparation for the call, and the regulatory fee was, there we go. You see the regulatory fee updated to 10 there to match with the product. So that's another thing that's happening right there. And that's because that regulatory fee, we have to have a 1-for-1 match with the phone lines. And the sales team, they may forget to do that sometimes. And then after the fact, we have to talk to the customer and let them know that there's extra fees. And they're not always happy to find that out after the fact. So we wanted to make sure it happened right then and there. Now, the next thing you'll have noticed a couple of the pop-ups that came up as I was demonstrating that feature. So let's talk about this. So when the sales team is coming in here, we want to let them know what's the next thing they need to do. Now, we filled in everything on here. So this is actually ready to quote. But for various reasons, that prompt doesn't say to create a quote. But the next thing to do is to create a quote. And by various reasons, I mean, the sales team, there was a lot of different nuances to them being ready to send the quote, and the logic just got too complex. So I didn't have that prompt say to create a quote just because the logic was too complex and cumbersome to implement in the JavaScript. But for most of the rest of the process, you're going to see that it's going to tell you exactly what to do. So then if we go here, we would create a quote. And then the quote will get created here. And we're going to just move along there because we're not really interested in deluge functions and buttons. So then it would move to quote sent, quote accepted once the quote is accepted. And then if I go to refresh here, now it's going to say click mail merge button to move the deal forward. Okay, the other thing you'll notice here is these buttons are being disabled. And that was, again, to ensure that the sales team is not clicking around at the wrong time and whatnot. There's not a need for them to do emails from here. There's also not a need for them to send with Zoho sign. And the reason for that is, if I scroll down here, we're going to pull the subform into the contract. And so, excuse me, using Zoho sign is not the right tool for that. If you do a mail merge with Zoho sign, that's the right tool. And so that's why they got the prompt. And you'll see here then that the mail merge would show up here if we were in production. And that would be the next thing that they would have to click. All right. Now, if I was to switch this to a different product, some of the other products we have, then it would prompt to say send with Zoho sign, because we don't have a subform that we're pulling in there. And so we can use this button here for that. But to kind of summarize some of those things there, it's giving them the prompts they need. It's also disabling the buttons. And also when you saw on the edit page, it's highlighting things that need to get filled in. The other thing I can do here, just to show here, if I go to edit, I want to show one other thing. I may not be able to do this, but I'm hoping that this will work. So then, perfect. Okay. So now we have this prompt here. So this is another thing. So I mentioned that the sales team needs to enter relevant data. And they need to be prompted what they need to fill out, and then either go fill it out or they can do it later. So let's say I land here, I see this, I may say, oh, I'm not going to update it now. And then it says, click the edit button to update the deal. That's the next step. Now, if I scroll down here, you'll see that I've highlighted those fields that I cleared out. And you get click edit button to update the deal. So it's giving them directions in multiple locations. It's really the I guess the motto over here was if they could break it, they will. So I just had to make this as much of a closed system as I could, and provide as many prompts as possible. And that was helpful for them because there was less need for them to reach out to me when they had questions or whatnot. Okay, so just to recap there. So at the detail page, when you create, it'll give you some prompts, some things you need to fill in order to save. When you add the specific product line, it'll give a matching product as a regulatory fee. Then when you land on the detail page, it'll prompt you what to do next. There'll be some buttons either enabled or disabled. And then it'll also highlight some fields based on any data that you need to enter, as well as give you the prompts here. And then if I go to the code here, I'm going to back out of this real quick. So I have things triggering at various points. If I go to the detail, let's start with the create page. Okay. So if I go on to the save, when you go to save, I'm calling the main function that we're going to look at. And then I'm also doing that on the detail page. And I'm also doing that for most of these. For a couple of these, I'm actually calling a specific function in the static resource that we're going to look at. So I'll go back to this one in a moment. Now let's go to the main function. Okay, let's go and scroll up here. Okay. So why am I only calling this function in all the other ones rather than having the code in those specific functions? And there's a couple of reasons. It's in one place. So if I need to see what's going on, I can just open it up and take a look at it. I can also see, I can see everything related to the process in one spot. Also, if I were to copy and paste it into a couple locations and it's not working in one location, then it's likely not working in the other locations or at the other events. And so then I'm having to go modify it in multiple locations, also having to go look for it to see where it is. And so those aren't ideal scenarios. And so I came to this particular solution based on a recommendation by Zoho support. So I reached out and said, hey, I have this use case here where I'm essentially using the same code in a couple of events with the client script and also with a couple different modules. And the recommendation was just to use one static resource. And I found that to be helpful. It does require more design and more thought put into it than if I'm going to write there's a couple down below that are shorter. It's certainly more effort to work through this longer piece of code here, which is just over 328 lines. Certainly takes more thought, but it is easier to maintain and debug when problems come up, by and large. Not in every use case, but by and large, it's easier to maintain and easier to debug. That's been my experience. All right, so let's talk through this. So when the deal load save is called, so if I go back to the, let's start with the detail page. So when the deal is loaded, it calls the deal load save function. Then I wrap it in a try catch. I'm going to get an error notification if something's not working. First thing I do is I grab the stage. Because based on the stage, I want to see what needs to happen. What's the prompt? Are there fields that need to be validated? Which fields? And then notifying what the user needs to do next. Then I'm finding out if it's the detail page. This is important because we're not providing prompts on the edit or create page. We're providing prompts on the detail page. And if my memory serves me correct, those confirmations don't work on the create page and the edit page. If anybody knows otherwise, feel free to correct me. But that was what I noticed. So I'm getting that. And let's go down to that one. So let's start with that piece of code. All right, here we go. So another thing we're doing here is we're interfacing with the client side. So I start out by returning, then I set an array with the edit, clone, and create page, because those are non-detail pages. And then sum is checking to see if any of the items include the URL. I have this in their URL. And if they do, then it's not the detail page. I'm returning false. And if any of these are included in the URL, then I pass, sorry, that's the inverse there. So if none of these are included in the URL, then I'm returning true, which means it is the detail page. For those who might have a little less JavaScript experience, this is a ternary where I'm saying if at the beginning. There's no if here, but that's what it's doing. If this is true, do this, and if not, do this. So it's like a shorthand version of a if-else statement. It's called ternary. Right, so that's the first thing I'm doing. Is it a detail page? Let's go back up and then return that. So the first feature we used there was getting the URL from the client side, the URL that's in the client's browser. Next, we're getting the field value. This is a very basic feature. We're getting the deal type. Then we're going to add fields to validate. What that means is what was highlighted, we're signifying which ones need to be validated. Which ones do we need to ensure they're filled in properly to ensure that we can proceed. And those are processed with the add fields to validate. Okay, so we start with the deal type. And then the next thing we do is we declare our fields variable. And I'm starting with account name and these items here. The idea there was these are some of the top fields. And so the idea was if they're not filled in, highlight them in red from top to bottom in order. The processing of it isn't lightning fast. And so you can actually see at times, you can see, you know, it happens fairly quick where it goes down. So I start out with those first. So they get highlighted first. And then as it works through the rest of the block here, then it highlights the rest. There certainly could be some pros and cons to doing it that way, as you could have the loader widget pull up and have that show, and then have the fields all be highlighted at once when it loads. That's one way to approach it. I chose not to do that because it's just another prompt for them as they see them show up. Say, oh, I need to fill these in. But you certainly could put a loader there, because as I said, it doesn't load instantaneously. Okay, so we set our fields. Then we're going to check our deal type. And since we were looking at a phone, the next thing we're going to do is push these fields to the array. And then we're going to push a few more to the array to get validated. So we go back up here. And then if it's not the detail page and we have a deal type, we're going to validate type, which is this block of code right here. And then those all call other functions. You could certainly recode this and not have as much dependencies here. And that's certainly something that you want to strive for. You know, I did a code review with another developer, and that was a recommendation there. And I chose not to go that route and keep some of the dependencies here, just because it's a little easier to parse through it, and also to decouple all the dependencies would certainly be a lot of work. And since it was working and not causing a ton of problems, or really causing problems at all, I thought it's not broken. Let's just keep move on to the next thing. Okay, so we checked that it was the detail page. We added the fields that need to get validated, and then we're validating the type. And then our last thing here is validating the form. Now this is where we get some more dependencies here, because that validating the form is going to do a few other things. Okay. Oh, forgive me. We need to actually talk through the a field validation. So let's talk about the type validation. Okay, so going back up here, when we validate the type, we're calling this function here. Then we're going to get the field object, the field value, and then we're going to pass it to a switch statement here. And so it's going to be type. So we're going to validate type, which is the next function here. And in here, if we have a field value, which shouldn't be relevant at this point because you wouldn't be calling this, but I just wanted to have an extra check there just to ensure that we don't have a problem. Then we're going to, based on the field value, in this case, it's phone router, then we're going to call this function here. And this is adding the line item that we discussed. So let's go down to this one. Okay. So when I added the phone line and I hit save, then it added another line. So in here, what I needed to do in order to ensure that happens is I had to set some CRM variables. So I set a CRM variable for the phone line, and then I set a CRM variable for the regulatory fee. And then I checked to see in the CRM variables, do we have get the extension ID, and then see if the phone services list or the array, if it has the extension ID. Pass that here, pass that ID. And if if it's there, then we're going to go back to the phone services array and get the index of that one, get its quantity. Then we're going to find the regulatory fee from the CRM variable list, get its ID. We're going to check to see if we already have it in the phone services array. We're going to get its product information from the products table, and then we're going to create a hash with all the relevant information. And then we're going to push it to here. Now, let me go through this. This is another ternary. So if we already have it in there, then I'm going to set whatever index it was. So in that instance, it was the first index, or the second item index number 1. I'm going to grab what I declared here and reassign its value. So how that would work is if in the example, I changed it from 5 to 10. So let's say I changed it from 5 to 10. Well, then what I have to do is, if it's the second item in that array and it's 5, I'm going to have to overwrite it with 10 as the new quantity. So that's what I'm doing here. And if it doesn't exist, so if I don't have it in when I look for it up here, then I'm going to add it. So ternary is checking, does it exist in there? If it does, then overwrite it with the new value, and if it doesn't, add it. And then we're going to push the whole array of phone services back up, because you have to overwrite the value. At the time of my development in this, I know there was workings on the Zoho side to allow further adding and removing from the subform, but at that time that wasn't there. So that's why I have it set in that way, and that's really a great way to do that. Just overriding it works just fine for a lot of cases, so that should work just fine for your use cases. Okay, then let's move on to validating the form. All right, and validating the form means it's going to prompt us that we are able to proceed, or we may need to do something else. All right, so we're passing the detail page, all the fields that need to be validated, and the deal type. The first thing it does is lets us know if we're ready to move. And that's validating all the required fields. It happens, let's pull that one up. Right over here. So it iterates, it's assuming that we're ready to move until we're not. So it receives all the fields, and if you're on and if it's the detail page or not. Iterates over all the fields. If you're on the detail page, what this is going to do here is it's going to highlight the fields. And on the detail page, the background and the errors, which I'm going to go over here, are a little different. So on the detail page, I'm going to give a tooltip, and I'm going to change the background color. If it's not validated. And then over here, if the field value is empty and it's not the detail page, we're going to point out that the field needs to be filled out. And we're going to set ready to move as false. Right, so just checking the fields and letting us know if we can save the record. In several cases on the edit page, we're not going to allow the saving if there's a crucial piece of data that they need to add. Then we return that. come back here and it lets us know if we're ready to move. Now, in this block here, we're gonna when we do a save, we're returning back to the detail page. And if it's not the detail page, sorry, I just confused myself there. So it's gonna let us know if we're ready to move. And then from here, if we're gonna validate if we have a value for detail page. Then we are going to set a few values here for some of the alerts that came up. So first, we're going to set one for the deal is in progress and everything's fine, and then letting you know what button you may or may not need to push. And then if you're not ready to move, you're going to get a confirmation, which came up several times, and it says the highlighted fields are empty, fill out to move forward. And then it gets the response. If they want to update now, then it'll just go right in and go to the edit page, which is going to use the navigate to. And we're passing the record edit page and the module and the record ID. I want to give a quick note here. So when you're doing something like page, you're getting the server value. And so you got to be cautious when you use that. But since I was getting the record ID, that worked just fine. But you'll notice in other places, like up here, I'm doing ZDK page, get field, stage, get value. Let's just validate that real quick here. Yeah, so page. So just wanted to let you know, if you're gonna make a call to actually pull from the server, but then the user may have made a change on, say, field edit, maybe, or save, and any of these, then it's crucial that you're not pulling data from the server. In that case, you're going to want to do something like get field, get value. Just wanted to point that out there. If you're ever working in there and you're running into a bug and you're pulling directly from the server on something such as this method here, you're going to run into problems because maybe they filled in the address, but on the server you don't have an address, and they're getting some sort of message or prompt or whatever. So just keep that in mind. Okay, back to this. Okay, so we're back here validating the form. We're going to navigate to the deal edit page if they said to go ahead and update now. And then if not, they get an alert message that says click edit button to update the deal. And that's going to happen down here. I'm just assigning the value based on what's happening here, and then later we're calling it. Now, if they are ready to move, then what's going to happen is we're going to assign the next step button. All right, and that's going to happen down here, and it's going to, based on certain criteria, it's gonna assign a string variable for the button name. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but just to say that it's going to get a string value for what's the next button you're supposed to push. And if there is a string value, then we're going to insert that into another string here, which will say click whatever our return was from this function, insert it into this string. And then after we get out of the if else statement, if we have an alert message, this is like an if. If you have an alert message, then go ahead and do this. So we're going to show whatever the alert message was. Okay. And then the last thing we're going to do after that alert message comes up is we're going to activate and deactivate any relevant buttons. So if we go down there, and this was really this was really like I don't know if you want to call it an aha moment, but it was just like, oh, this is a great tool to have, especially when you're working with, users who might not be in the system often, or they have the potential of forgetting or getting confused on what they need to do, or having similar buttons that they could potentially push at the right or wrong moment. Activating or deactivating the buttons is helpful to keep them on the train tracks so they don't get derailed and create duplicate data, or potentially send out an invoice or generate an invoice when they shouldn't, or send extra contracts, things like that. So this has been really helpful. So what I did is whatever the value was up here, like the next step, that was part of the alert button here, then we're going to check to find it in the return value here. So when I do zdk.page.get buttons, it gives me a list of a lot of the buttons. If I go over here, you'll see some of these ones down here. You don't get access to that in the get buttons, but the rest of these you do. So that's helpful. So then I'm just looping over whatever the response is for get buttons. And then I'm checking to see if it has, I'll get into some of the other logic here in a moment. But main thing is I'm checking to see that, does it include the disable anything, disable anything that's not that button is essentially it, right? So my disable is true when I'm looping over the button until I know that it's the button I want them to click. And then down here, if disable is true, then disable that button. Now, for some of the other logic here, I want to make sure that the edit button is always available. I was trying to steer them to use the prompt that I showed you, and it would prompt them to say, "Are you ready to edit?" And but sometimes they would click out of there, and then they were stuck. So I gave them the edit button so they could always get in and edit. So the edit button will always be enabled. The whatever button they're supposed to click next will get enabled. And then we have some logic for some other things here. Like for instance, I mentioned when we have a subform, we want to use the mail merge and not send with Zoho send. So if it's not a phone deal, then we can go ahead and enable the send with Zoho send because we have no subforms. So that covers the core of the logic there. We're using a lot of great features there that really help the users to almost like a Google Maps. All right, turn here in 500 feet. Take this exit, 5 miles, etc., etc. And that's what the goal of this was to give them those clear directions so they knew what they needed to do, hide things that they shouldn't be doing at the appropriate times. And it really reduced a lot of stress for them, a lot less phone calls for me, a lot less data cleanup. So it's really been a huge win on that front. And like I mentioned, and I have here at the top here, there's a lot of benefits to doing this as a static resource because I have one place where I can go and debug, and I can go and edit and maintain. So there's a lot of benefits there. The other thing that's great about doing this is it's essentially a library, or if you want to call it a package. In Ruby, I use a lot of Ruby. They call them gems, where you install it to a program, and then you have access to the methods and the functions. And the same with the packages, whether it's Python or JavaScript. So this functions in a similar manner. So I called this, right? And then of course in here I'm calling other ones. But the other thing is all of these, you have the ability to call them in other client scripts. So if I go to I believe it's the edit page here. If I go to on-deal change, on the on-deal change, or any module, it passes in the field name. And you can access whatever the field is in its name. So then what I do is I'm validating that field, which I already have declared in here. Right, field validate. And then whatever it is, then I call another function to validate, whatever should be in there. So you can imagine lots of scenarios where you could have reusable functions in your static resource, and you can use it in multiple places. And in our instance, I have labeled the API names for the leads, deals, and quotes the same. So the address is the same, email, if it's there, the product type, and a handful of other fields. So I'm actually able to use this chunk of code as a static resource for any client scripts that are triggering on any of those pages. And it's really great. I think I may have one more block of code that I initially wasn't planning on going over, but we are doing well in time. So let's see if I can access it here. And if I can't pull it up quickly, then we'll just not use it. Yeah, I'm not sure I can pull it up. But what I will showcase is on the deal, when adding a contact here, it'll pull in the email and the phone number. And that's a really simple one that you can do. So if we were to go in to create a new script here, let's just call this any script. And the create page, and let's say it's a field event on the contact name on change. So then here we would do contact. Let's assign it as a let contact object equals cpk dot page dot get field. I'm just going to do pseudocode here. My syntax might be a little off. I just want to show an example of that because I didn't have the code ready. But that's another great thing that you can do, and that's similar where it pulled the contact name in, but also where the deal name was formatted properly. So that's kind of similar to what I'm doing here. So first I'm getting the contact name. Now I'm going to get the contact ID. And so that would be contact object get. No, that's deluge. You gotta be careful. If you use a lot of deluge, you don't want to get yourself confused in here. Get value. So ID, and you could potentially also just do that ID, but let's just do get value. Right after you get value, then you could do that. Let's do let contact value, and we could do the contact ID. equals contact val.id. And then from here, you could make a call to the using the, if I click here, this will take me to, you know, getting records. So I could, we're not going to get the lead here, but I can copy this code and use it for the context, and then fetch by ID. And then I don't like to use var. I like to use let, not necessarily for scope reasons, but it just seems to cut down a little bit on the overhead. The function runs just a touch faster than if I declare it as a var. And I guess that probably has to do with the fact that the scope of let is just within the block and not within the, it's not beyond the block that you're running. Yeah, and then from here, because you've gotten the contact, then you could get the email, you know, contact dot email. Or you could probably do it a little simpler than that, and you can do, let's see, ZDH dot page dot get field dot set value. Oh, if we did like email here, then you could set the email in such a manner. So that's a nice way where you could pull in information to a record if you're associating an account, a contact. If you have some other custom modules and you want to auto-populate some data, then doing something of this nature, that'll work out great. And you can pull more info in there. You know, if you wanted to set the deal name, let's say the deal name was based off of the contact, then in that instance, then you would set it as a string, and then you would interpolate the contact name. So let's just, yeah, there we go. And then, you know, and then you could insert the dates or maybe the product type on the deal. But yeah, that's just kind of the shorthand version of how I was setting the deal name, as well as how I was pulling in the contacts info and inserting it into the deal. So then I guess just to go back, then I kind of touched on it, but you know, this just going back to the benefits of static resources. They're flexible, scalable, easy to maintain, and it's just like you're building your own tools, and then you're putting them in your tool pouch, and you have more tools that you can pull out when you need to do something, and craft them however you want. And I think that's just one of the great things about it. And of course, being a software developer, Zoho developer, or PHP or Ruby or whatever language you're using, you know, building your own tools just gives you you know, full control, and you can craft it however you want. And I think that's one of the other things that I really like that I didn't have as a bullet point here, but it's really key, to have that flexibility and that control to build your own tools. And so, you know, we went over the use case and everything that we were able to do there, and the benefits of static resources. And so, I just want to open it up for any questions.